it had been prophesied on his conception that the prince would renounce the world upon seeing a sick man, an old man, and a corpse, which human misery he saw while riding through the royal park one day when he was 29 years old. Prince Siddhartha left his wife and child, and after 6 years of solitude and contemplation, during which he devoted himself to the severest asceticism, living on seeds, grass, and even dung, he emerged as the Buddha, preaching a religion based on salvation by suffering. Existence, he proclaimed, was evil, and desire was the cause of sorrow. Nirvana, the absorption into the Supreme Spirit, was the reward obtained by the suppression of desire. Gautama Buddha, Gautama from his clan name, and he is called Sakyamuni Buddha from his tribal name, spent all his life as a wanderer, preaching his doctrine from the time he attained enlightenment under a bo tree at Bodh Gaya in northern India until his death 45 years later. Buddha, or the enlightened, derives from the Sanskrit bodhati, he awakens. It is estimated that Buddhism has about 140 million followers today. So that's definitely not the case, that the austerities resulted in the enlightenment, but that the Buddha, realizing the non-efficacy of the austerities and giving them up, is what actually led to the liberation, finding the middle way. So that was preached a doctrine of salvation through suffering. Existence is evil.
But I mean, it's helpful to. What year was that printed?
This is 2000.
Oh my God. It also is helpful to recognize how mainstream it is, how difficult it is for people in a Abrahamic and Judeo-Christian and theistic centered religion, how difficult it is to get their minds around. What the heck is this? Because it doesn't make any sense to most people who rely on some sort of deity.
Yeah. So this is chapter 12, the doctrine. What is the Dhamma that was well proclaimed by the Supreme Physician? Is it an attempt to make a complete description of the world? Is it a metaphysical system? The Blessed One was once living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove. A deity called Rohitasa came to him late in the night, paid homage to him, and asked, "Lord, the world's end, where one neither is born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears, is it possible to know or see or reach that by traveling there?" Friend, that there is a world's end where one neither is born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears, which is to be known or seen or reached by traveling there, that I do not say. Yet I do not say that there is the ending of suffering without reaching the world's end. Rather, it is in this fathom-long carcass with its perceptions and its mind that I describe the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. And then verses. It is utterly impossible to reach by walking the world's end, but none escape from suffering unless the world's end has been reached. It is a sage, a knower of the world, who gets to the world's end, and it is he by whom the holy life has been lived out. In knowing the world's end, he is at peace, and hopes for neither this world nor the next. That's from Anguttara Nikaya 4, Book of the Fours, Sutta 46. Blessed One was once living at Kosambi in a wood of Singsapa trees. He picked up a few leaves in his hand, and he asked the bhikkhus, "How do you conceive this, bhikkhus? Which is more, the few leaves that I have picked up in my hand, or those on the trees in the wood?" The leaves that the Blessed One has picked up in his hand are few, those in the wood are far more. So too, bhikkhus, the things that I have known by direct knowledge are more. The things that I have told you are only a few. Why have I not told them? Because they bring no benefit, no advancement in the holy life, and because they do not lead to dispassion, to fading, to ceasing, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. That is why I have not told them. And what have I told you? This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. That is what I have told you. Why have I told it? Because it brings benefit and advancement in the holy life, and because it leads to dispassion, to fading, to ceasing, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. So, bhikkhus, let your task be this. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. That was Samyutta Nikaya 56:31. It is not then an attempt to make some complete description of the world, either internal or external. Is it a metaphysical system, a consistent logical construction? And if so, what premise is it based on? Once when the Blessed One had gone into Rajagaha for alms, the naked ascetic Kassapa went up to him, and after greeting him, he said, "We would ask Master Gotama something, if Master Gotama would consent to give an answer." "It is not the time for questions, Kassapa. We are among houses." He asked a second and a third time and received the same reply. He then said, "It is not much we want to ask, Master Gotama." "Ask then, Kassapa, whatever you like." "How is it, Master Gotama? Is suffering of one's own making?" "Do not put it like that, Kassapa." "Then is suffering of another's making?" "Do not put it like that, Kassapa." "Then is suffering both one's own and another's making?" "Do not put it like that, Kassapa." "Then is suffering neither of one's own nor another's making, but fortuitous?" "Do not put it like that, Kassapa." "Then is there no suffering?" "It is not a fact that there is no suffering. There is suffering, Kassapa." "Then does Master Gotama neither know nor see suffering?" "It is not a fact that I neither know nor see suffering. I both know and see suffering, Kassapa." That was Samyutta Nikaya 12:17. Once too, the wanderer Uttiya went to the Blessed One, and after greeting him, he sat down at one side. Then he asked, "How is it, Master Gotama? The world is eternal. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That is not answered by me, Uttiya." "Then the world is not eternal. It is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That too is not answered by me, Uttiya." "The world is finite. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That too is not answered by me, Uttiya." "Then the world is infinite. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That too is not answered by me, Uttiya." "The soul is the same as the body. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That too is not answered by me, Uttiya." "Then the soul is one thing and the body another. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong?" "That too is not answered by me, Uttiya." After death, a perfect one is only that the truth and everything else wrong? That too is not answered by me, Uttiya. Then after death, a perfect one is not. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong? That too is not answered by me, Uttiya. Then after death, a perfect one both is and is not. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong? That too is not answered by me, Uttiya. Then after death, a perfect one neither is nor is not. Is only that the truth and everything else wrong? That too is not answered by me, Uttiya. But why does Master Gotama decline to answer when I ask him these questions? What then is answered by Master Gotama? I teach the Dhamma to disciples from direct knowledge, Uttiya, for purification of beings, for surmounting sorrow and lamentation, for ending pain and grief, for attainment of the true goal, for realizing Nibbana. Master Gotama, does that Dhamma provide an outlet from suffering for all the world, or for half, or for a third? When this was said, the Blessed One remained silent. This is interesting because it's different. The Buddha is speaking. This is a very important part of the Buddha's teaching, is that he's speaking completely from a different paradigm, and that he's looking toward the realization of Nibbana and the relinquishment of suffering, not getting everything right in terms of like answering all these different questions and thinking, well, okay, I got it. That's how it is. Yeah. So it's coming from direct experience, and that I think even now this is so relevant. When this was said, the Blessed One remained silent. Then the Venerable Ananda thought, the wanderer Uttiya must not conceive any such pernicious view as, when the monk Gotama is asked a question peculiar to me and to no one else, and he founders and does not answer, is it because he is unable? That would be for his harm and suffering. So he said to him, Friend Uttiya, I shall give you a simile, for some wise men here get to know through a simile the meaning of what is said. Suppose a king had a city with strong ditches, ramparts, and bastions, and a single gate, and he had a wise, clever, sagacious gatekeeper there, who stopped those whom he did not know and admitted only those whom he knew. And since he had himself gone round the path encircling the city and had seen no gaps in the ramparts or any hole even big enough for a cat to pass through, he might conclude that living beings above a certain size might go in and out through the gate. So too, friend Uttiya, a perfect one's concern is not that all the world shall find an outlet by this, or half, or a third, but rather that whoever has found or finds or will find an outlet from the world of suffering, that is always done by abandoning the 5 hindrances, defilements that weaken understanding, and by maintaining and being the 7 factors of enlightenment with minds well established on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Your question which you put the Blessed One was framed in the wrong way. That is why the Blessed One did not answer it. That's from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Tens, Sutta 95. On another occasion, the wanderer Vachagota went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. Then he asked, How is it, Master Gotama, does self exist? When this was said, the Blessed One was silent. How is it then, Master Gotama, does self not exist? And for a second time the Blessed One was silent. Then the wanderer Vachagota got up from his seat and went away. Not long after he had gone, the Venerable Ananda asked the Blessed One, Lord, how is it that when the Blessed One was questioned, he did not answer? If, when I was asked, does self exist, I had answered, self exists, that would have been the belief of those who hold the theory of eternalism. And if, when I asked, does self not exist, I had answered, self does not exist, that would have been the belief of those who hold the theory of annihilation. Again, if when asked, does self exist, I had answered, self exists, that would have been in conformity I had answered, self exists. Would that have been in conformity with my knowledge that all things are not self? And if, when asked, does self not exist, I had answered, self does not exist, then, confused as he already is, Ananda, the wanderer Vachagota, would have become still more confused, assuming, surely then I had a self before, and now I have none. That was from Samyutta Nikaya 44:10. At one time, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi, and at that time, a number of wandering monks and Brahmins of various sects had gone into Savatthi for alms. They had differing views, opinions, and notions, and they relied for support on their differing views. There were some monks and Brahmins who asserted and believed that the world is eternal, only this is true, everything else is wrong, and some who asserted and believed each of the other 9 views. They quarreled, brawled, wrangled, and wounded each other with verbal darts. The Dhamma is like this. The Dhamma is not like this. The Dhamma is not like this. The Dhamma is like this. Then a number of bhikkhus, on their return from their alms round, told the Blessed One about it. The Blessed One said, Bhikkhus, there was once a certain king in Savatthi. He told a man, Come, man, get together all the men in Savatthi who have been born blind. Yes, sire, he replied. And when he had done so, he told the king, who said, Then show them an elephant. He did so, saying, You men blind from birth, an elephant is like this. And he showed the elephant's head to some, and its ear to others, and its tusk to others, and its trunk to others, and its body to others, and its foot to others, and its rump to others, and its tail to others, and the tuft at the end of its tail to others. Then he went to the king and told him what he had done. So the king went to the men blind from birth, and he asked them, Has an elephant been shown to you? Yes, sire. Then describe what the elephant is like. Now those who had been shown the head said, Sire, the elephant is like a jar. And those who were shown the ear said, It is like a winnowing basket. And those shown the tusk said, It is like a post. And those shown the trunk said, It is like a plow's pole. And those shown the body said, It is like a granary. And those shown the foot said, It is like the base of a column. And those shown the rump said, It is like a mortar. And those shown the tail said, It is like a pestle. And those shown the tuft at the end of the tail said, It is like a broom. They fought among themselves with their fists, crying, The elephant is like this, it is not like this. The elephant is not like this, it is like this. But the king was pleased. So too the wanderers of other sects are blind and eyeless. That is why they quarrel, brawl, wrangle, and wound each other with verbal darts. The Dhamma is like this. The Dhamma is not like this. The Dhamma is not like this. The Dhamma is like this. That's from Udana, 6-4. That's one of these classics. Simile of the blind man and the elephant. And then Venerable Ñāṇamoli has a paragraph here with some explanation. So it would appear to be a mistake to call the Buddha's teaching either an attempt to describe the world completely or a metaphysical system built up by logic. Is it, then, an ethical commandment, a revealed religion of faith, or simply a stoical code of behavior? Before an attempt can be made to find answers to those questions, some sort of a survey of the doctrines taught is needed. The material contained in the discourses seems, in fact, to be rather in the nature of material for a map, for each to make his own map, but all oriented alike. These oriented descriptions of facets of experience, in fact, enable a person to estimate their position and judge for themselves what they had better do. The discourses offer not so much a description as a set of overlapping descriptions. Close examination of existence finds always something of the qualities of the mirage and of the paradox behind the appearance. The ends can never be made quite to meet. The innumerable different facets presented in the suttas with countless repetitions of certain of these facets in varying combinations and contexts remind one of a collection of air photographs from which maps are to be made. The facets in the discourses are all oriented to cessation of suffering, the 4 points of their compass being the Four Noble Truths. Let us try to make a specimen map out of some of this material. In this case, since a start has to be made somewhere, we can start for our baseline with birth, which, like death, is to the ordinary man an everyday fact, and at the same time an insoluble mystery. There is no first beginning. Is consciousness conceivable without a past? Can it be said to have a beginning? Bhikkhus, the round is beginningless. Of the beings that travel and trudge through this round, shut in as they are by ignorance and fettered by craving, no first beginning is describable. That's Samyutta Nikaya 15-1. That both I and you have had to travel and trudge through this long round is owing to our not discovering, not penetrating 4 truths. What 4? They are the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And that was from Digha Nikaya 16, Mahaparinibbana Sutta. The Four Noble Truths. Now here is a description of the Four Noble Truths. And a lot of these descriptions jump between Digha Nikaya 22 and Anguttara Nikaya 3, Anguttara Nikaya Bukta 3, Sutta 61, and also some on and off suttas from the Samyutta Nikaya. What is the noble truth of suffering? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering, association with the loathed is suffering, dissociation from the loved is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the 5 aggregates affected by clinging are suffering. What is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is craving, which renews being and is accompanied by relish and lust, relishing this and that. In other words, craving for sensual desires, craving for being, and craving for non-being. But whereon does this craving arise and flourish? Wherever there is that which seems lovable and gratifying, thereon it arises and flourishes. It is with ignorance as condition that formations come to be, with formations as condition, consciousness, with consciousness as condition, name and form, with name and form as condition, the 6-fold base for contact, with the 6-fold base as condition, contact, with contact as condition, feeling, with feeling as condition, craving, with craving as condition, clinging, with clinging as condition, being, with being as condition, birth, with birth as condition, aging and death come to be, and also sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That is how there is an origin to this whole aggregate mass of suffering. This is called the noble truth of the origin of suffering. What is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading and cessation of that same craving, the rejecting, relinquishing, leaving, and renouncing of it. But whereon is this craving abandoned and made to cease? Wherever there is that which seems lovable and gratifying, thereon it is abandoned and made to cease. With the remainderless fading and cessation of ignorance, there is cessation of formations. With the cessation of formations, cessation of consciousness. With cessation of birth, aging, and death, also sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That is how there is a cessation of this whole aggregate mass of suffering. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. What is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering? It is this noble eightfold path, that is to say, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Of these four noble truths, the noble truth of suffering must be penetrated to by full knowledge of suffering. The noble truth of the origin of suffering must be penetrated to by abandoning craving. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering must be penetrated to by realizing cessation of craving. The noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering must be penetrated to by maintaining and being the Noble Eightfold Path. These Four Noble Truths are real, not unreal, not other than they seem. The Four Noble Truths are each analyzed and defined in detail. It was said that the truth of suffering was, in short, the five aggregates affected by clinging. Here are definitions of them. What are the five aggregates affected by clinging? They are the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception aggregate affected by clinging, the formations aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. Why does one say form? It is deformed, rupati. That is why it is called form, rupa. Deformed by what? By cold and heat and hunger and thirst, by contact with gadflies, gnats, wind, sunburn, and creeping things. What is form? The four great elements and any form derived upon them by clinging are called form. Whatever in oneself, belonging to oneself, is solid, solidified, and clung to, such as head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, bowels, entrails, gorge, dung, or whatever else in oneself, belonging to oneself, is solid, solidified, and clung to. That is called earth element in oneself. Now, earth element in oneself and external earth element are only earth element. Whatever in oneself is water, watery, and clung to, such as bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, oil of the joints, urine, or whatever else in oneself is water, watery, and clung to, that is called water element in oneself. Now, water element in oneself and external water element are only water element. Whatever in oneself is fire, fiery, and clung to, such as that whereby one is warmed, ages, and is consumed, and whereby what is eaten, drunk, chewed, and tasted gets digested and assimilated, or whatever else in oneself is fire, fiery, and clung to, that is called fire element in oneself. Now, fire element in oneself and external fire element are only fire element. Whatever in oneself is air, airy, and clung to, such as upgoing winds, downgoing winds, winds in the belly and in the bowels, winds that pervade all the limbs, in-breath and out-breath, or whatever else in oneself is air, airy, and clung to, that is called air element in oneself. Now, air element in oneself and external air element are only air element. Also, whatever in oneself is space, spatial, and clung to, such as ear hole, nose hole, mouth door, and that aperture whereby what is eaten, drunk, chewed, and tasted is swallowed, and that wherein it is contained, and that whereby it passes out below, or whatever else in oneself is space, spatial, and clung to, that is called space element. Now, space element in oneself and external space element are only space element, and space element has nowhere any standing of its own. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 62, the Rahula Wada Sutta, the Buddha teaching element, practice element contemplation to Venerable Rahula. Any form whatever, whether past, future, or present, in oneself or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, that is affected by taints and provocative of clinging, that is called the form aggregate affected by clinging. Why does one say feeling? It is felt. That is why it is called feeling. Felt as what? Felt as pleasure, as pain, or as neither pain nor pleasure. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as pleasant and gratifying is pleasant feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as painful and hurting is painful feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as neither gratifying nor hurting is neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Pleasant feeling is pleasant in virtue of presence. Pleasant feeling is pleasant when it's there, and painful when it changes. Painful feeling is painful when it's there, and pleasant when it changes. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling is pleasant when there is no knowledge present, and painful when there is not knowledge present. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 44. There are these 6 bodies of such feeling: feeling born of eye contact, of ear contact, of nose contact, of tongue contact, of body contact, and of mind contact. Any feeling whatever that is affected by taints and provocative of clinging, that is called the feeling aggregate affected by clinging. Why does one say perception? It perceives. That is why it is called perception. Perceives what? It perceives, for example, blue and yellow and red and white. There are these 6 bodies of perception: perception of visible forms, of sounds, of odors, of flavors, of tangibles, and of ideas. Any perception whatever that is affected by taints and provocative of clinging, that is called the perception aggregate affected by clinging. And I'll stop there, and he'll continue on through sankhara and consciousness, but that's fleshed out a little bit more. So go back to that. Questions? About 10 minutes.
those first few where you have those different ascetics and philosophers asking some kind of obscure questions. Maybe just to point out that those were, in India at the time had a very well-established tradition of debate and philosophical conjecture and so forth. And those were all kind of classic questions from very seemingly well-developed logical philosophical systems. So he was sort of, sidestepping them or pointing away from those systems rather than indulging in them or something like that. But they can be kind of confusing if you're not used to the jargon or the systems themselves.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to open a debate with him and find some way in.
Yeah, it's kind of, how do you say, somewhat, one can use the same kind of approach, because sometimes you're actually asked to come up with a kind of a scientific rationalization for the Buddha's teachings, and that's not the point. Or scientific cosmology or something like that.
Even in a more extreme case, somebody could ask, I don't know it very well, but ask about the Buddhist opinion about the nature of the Trinity.
Oh, yes,
where
yes.
it's you have hundreds of years of tradition of
Oh gosh, even
blood spill and everything. Actually, we don't have an opinion about that.
don't need it. And that's really suffering.
I think it's also worth noting that one of the assumptions of the scientific method is that science's knowledge is always incomplete. So it's always kind of changing and adapting its view based on information. So I see a lot of risk in trying to, conform the teachings to the current scientific paradigm, because that won't necessarily be the paradigm held by scientists 100 years later.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, it's actually a really salient or really an important point, and it's not usually made because, or it's not easily understood because the practice of science, a good scientist is never really sure about a lot of things, and they're oftentimes very cautious about the conclusions that they draw, and they're very flexible. Ideally, the ideal scientist is extraordinarily flexible. When new data comes in, they revise their assumptions and they go forward to test. Whereas in the pop culture, what you often see are whatever the pundits and the what do they call them, journalists and so forth, taking conclusions that a good scientist draw, and then transforming them into paradigms, into worldviews, into this, only this is true, everything else is false. And scientists, of course, do that too all the time. But it is, I think that's why I think Buddhism appeals to many of us, because it shares that kind of inquiry, that aspect of inquiry. But Buddhists too can fall into these traps of getting really viewy about these things.
Yeah. And if you were to go and ask that scientist, they would probably be the first one to say, well, this is what I know, and this is what I don't know. But then the interpretation of their discoveries won't tell you that. But